Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Merdeka.
Yang amat berhormat Syaykh Az-Zaytun, Profesor Dr. Abdus Salam Rashidi Panji Gumilang, Magister Pertanian beserta Umi dan keluarga. Yang terhormat Arial University, Senior Lecturer, Middle East and Central Asia Research Center, Head Mecarc, Bapak Dr. Gadi Hitman. Yang berhormat Ketua Pengawas Lembaga Kesejahteraan Masjid, Masjid Rahmatan Lil Alamin, Ustadz Dr. Muhammad Yusuf Rashidi Agung Sidayu MBA. Yang berhormat Ketua Yayasan Pesantren Indonesia, Ustadz Imam Prawoto SE CRBD MBA, beserta seluruh eksponen, hadirin peserta silaturahim Topo Broto yang berbahagia.
Kita bersyukur kepada Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala karena atas nikmat dan karunia-Nya pada hari ini Ahad 16 Muharram 1444 Hijriah bertepatan dengan 14 Agustus 2022 Miladiah, kita dapat berkumpul di Masjid Rahmatan Lil Alamin sempena Silaturahim Syaykh Az-Zaytun bersama santri, wali santri dan seluruh sivitas Az-Zaytun. Salawat serta salam semoga Allah curahkan kepada junjungan kita Nabi Muhammad SAW.
Hadirin, telah pun disusun atur cara sebagai berikut. Pertama, pembukaan. Kedua, menyanyikan lagu Indonesia Raya. Ketiga, kuliah umum oleh Arial University, Senior Lecturer, Middle East and Central Asia Research Center, Head Mecarc, Bapak Dr. Gadi Hitman. Dengan tema The Role of Arabian Israeli Politicians in the Israel Political Scene. Keempat, Taushiyah Syaykh Az-Zaytun. Kelima, penutup.
Hadirin yang berbahagia, dengan mengharap ridho Allah, mari kita mulakan acara ini dengan berbasmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Menyanyikan lagu Indonesia Raya kepada seluruh hadirin, baik yang hadir di tempat acara maupun yang daring, kami mohon untuk berdiri.
Hiduplah Indonesia Raya, Indonesia tanah airku, tanah tumpah darahku. Di sanalah aku berdiri, jadi pandu ibuku. Indonesia kebangsaanku, bangsa dan tanah airku. Marilah kita berseru, Indonesia bersatu. Hiduplah tanahku, hiduplah negeriku, bangsaku, rakyatku semuanya. Bangunlah jiwanya, bangunlah badannya untuk Indonesia Raya. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka. Tanahku, negeriku yang ku cinta. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka. Hiduplah Indonesia Raya. Indonesia, tanah yang mulia, tanah kita yang kaya. Di sanalah aku berdiri untuk selama-lamanya. Indonesia, tanah pusaka, pusaka kita semuanya. Marilah kita mendoa, Indonesia bahagia. Suburlah tanahnya, suburlah jiwanya, bangsanya, rakyatnya semuanya. Sadarlah hatinya, sadarlah budinya untuk Indonesia Raya. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka. Tanahku, negeriku yang ku cinta. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka. Hiduplah Indonesia Raya. Indonesia, tanah yang suci, tanah kita yang sakti. Di sanalah aku berdiri, jaga ibu sejati. Indonesia tanah berseri, tanah yang aku sayangi. Marilah kita berjanji, Indonesia abadi. Selamatlah rakyatnya, selamatlah putranya, pulaunya, lautnya, semuanya. Majulah negerinya, majulah pandunya, untuk Indonesia Raya. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, tanahku, negeriku yang ku cinta. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, hiduplah Indonesia Raya. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, tanahku, negeriku yang ku cinta. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, hiduplah Indonesia Raya.
Hadirin disilakan duduk kembali.
Atur cara selanjutnya, kuliah umum dengan tema The Role of Arabian Israeli Politicians in the Israel Political Scenes oleh Arial University Senior Lecturer, Middle East and Central Asia Research Center, Head Mecarc, Bapak Dr. Gadi Hitman. Dipandu oleh Ustadz Dr. Muhammad N. Abdul Razzaq, SSI MT. Kepadanya kami persilahkan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Merdeka. Yang amat berhormat Grand Chancellor of Al-Zaytun Indonesia, Syekh Profesor Dr. Abdul Salam Rashidi Panji Gumilang, Magister Pertanian, beserta Umi dan seluruh keluarga. Yang berhormat Ketua Pengawas Lembaga Kesejahteraan MASJID Rahmatan Lil Alamin, Dato' Muhammad Yusuf Rasidi Agung Sidayu. Yang berhormat Ketua Yayasan Pesantren Indonesia, Al-Ustadz Imam Prawoto, SE CRBD MBA, beserta seluruh eksponen yang berbahagia. Dan para hadirin sekalian, baik yang berada di dalam Masjid Rahmatan Lil Alamin, juga yang bergabung di dalam Zoom meeting. Let me give some prologue of this seminar. Brother and sisters, in all over Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and all over the world, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Merdeka. More than 12 years ago, and on every occasion, our Grand Chancellor of Al-Zaytun Indonesia, Profesor Dr. Abdul Salam Rashidi Panji Gumilang, Magister of Agriculture, encourage the Indonesian government to recognize the sovereignty both of the two states, Israel and Palestine. Indonesia is the only country with the largest Muslim population in the world. Of course, this will have an impact on the OIC or OKI member states, most of which have even recognized Israel's sovereignty. If Indonesia makes efforts to do so, then this is a politically correct diplomatic effort, which means that Indonesia has played an active role in maintaining the world peace. more than that what America under President Trump did with the Abraham Accord initiative. In connection with the Grand Chancellor's encouragements above, today's Topobroto, Sunday, August 14, is a very interesting webinar because of the participation of Dr. Gadi Hitman from Arial University of Israel as a senior lecturer, Arab and Islamic expert, who will explain academically the role of Arab Israeli politicians in the Israeli political scene. On behalf of the Grand Chancellor of Al-Zaytun, Indonesia, allow me to thank and appreciate very much to our guest speaker, Shalom and Todaraba. The time are changed, and after 73 years of Israel's history, Arab Israeli citizens for the first time participated in the Israeli government. After the fall of Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of the Likud party, even became the key success of the current Israeli government. Although the prime minister of this government is Naftali Bennett, now replaced by Lapid Jared, Minister of Foreign Affairs, is the leader of the radical right-wing political party ideology and interest conflict with Arab parties, and which oppose Arab participation in coalition or governments. But whatever his political beliefs, the reality that must be followed is that his national religious political movement, which represents many Jewish settlers, signed a coalition agreement with RAM, an Arab Islamic party. Since the formation of Israel as a state, there has been an unwritten rule that any governing coalition will only be formed by Jewish Zionist parties. There was only one exception. When the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin relied on the support of an Arab party after the Oslo Peace Accords in 1990, however, the deal did not formalize the party entry into the ruling coalition. Now, along with the political instability that occurred at the end of the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu, then like it or dislike it, the Arab Israeli must be involved. The political reality mentioned above is not the desire of Jewish parties for a peace agreement, but rather due to political compulsion due to Israel's political instability after 4 rounds of election in 2 years without a clear winner. Combined with the strong will of the opposition, as long as it is not Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In fact, the leader who was the first to consider the participation of the Arab party in the government was Benjamin Netanyahu, who was the first to understand the potential need to cooperate with Arab parties. After all other attempts to form a ruling coalition failed, he tried to lure leader of RAM, Mansur Abbas, even before Bennett did, but to no avail. Meanwhile, Mansur Abbas has taken advantage of the situation by changing the way Arab parties deal with the Jewish politics in Israel. By agreeing to join the government, for the great benefit of the Arab population, who for decades never joined the Israeli government, which continues to support the occupation of their Palestinian brethren, oppress them, and deny them their basic rights. Even politically alienated from the leadership coalition by the Jewish parties, fears of cooperating with them. After joining and becoming the key to the government, the main demands among the various demands are addressing the issue of violence, demolition of houses, planning a new Arab villages and cities, education, and equality. Will positive political developments for the two Israelis of Jewish and Arab descent continue? The answer is ultimately dependent on the Israelis of Arab descent in determining political attitudes. However, all of this become knowledge for all of us in Indonesia, that Israel actually consists of two nations who live together in peace, namely the Israelis of Jewish descent, who are the majority, and the Israelis of Arab descent, who make up 20% of the total population. Arabic is the second language after Hebrew. Even more than 13 districts in Israel whose residents are citizens of Arab descent. The Israeli army also consists of combination of Israeli Jews and Arabs who are known to be brave and obedient to their military commands, even if they have to deal with the fellow Arabs, Philistines, Hamas in the Gaza Strips. But the most important achievement mentioned above is the fundamental change marked by acceptance of Arab parties into Israeli politics and the recognition of Arab political parties as legitimate partners in politics and power sharing in Israel. And this is a success that Arab parties have failed to achieve since the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Whatever happened, this is a historically political change of Israel, hopefully will be continued. Brothers and sisters, to understand more about the role of Arab-Israeli politicians in the Israeli political scene, our guest speaker, Dr. Gadi Hitman, will explain clearly based on the current political events in considering his academic expertise. Before giving time to him, allow me to introduce further who is Dr. Gadi Hitman. Dr. Gadi Hitman is a senior lecturer in the Department of Middle Eastern Studies at Arial University. His main fields of research are development of theoretical knowledge, nationality, ethnicity, protest and political violence, and majority-minority relationships with a specialization in Palestinian and Israeli Arab issues. To date, he has published 2 books on the Israeli Arab minority. The first is Israel and its Arab minority, Dialog, Protest, Violence, published by Lexington on 2016. The second is National Schism and Civil Integration, published by Sussex Academic Press on 2018. And the most interesting analysis is SWOT analysis of family Wahhabi nationalism case study. Dr. Hitman worked for almost 25 years as a senior researcher in the Prime Minister Office Research Unit. Finally, thanks again, and the floor is yours, Dr. Hadi Hitman. Please.
Much for the war. Hallelujah. Okay, so I will move on. I'm sorry for the technical problem. Second remark that I would like to comment here before I start is that non-Jews, they were always the majority in the land of Israel until 1948, and which is very important. Most of them, most of the history were Muslims. And the third remark before I start is that you must all remember that what we call today the Arab minority in Israel has become minority after the 1948 war. They were majority and they became minority. They lost in a war, and it was the first time ever that they found themselves under a new sovereign state, which is the state of Israel, which is a Jewish, which has a Jewish character. For that reason, the first slide of my presentation, you see the all three flags. We are going from left to right, from the subject generation after what we call the Nakba in Arabic, the catastrophe of the loss of 1948. Then came the new second generation of the erect one that tried to behave politically and in other ways. And today we can talk about the insult generation, the third or maybe even the fourth generation after 1948, those young people who are now seeing what's going on all over the world due to the technological revolution by the internet and the social media, and they are looking for other things. So I'll start by some figures that all of us will know what I'm talking about. We are talking approximately about 1.85 million people. If we exclude from this number 350,000 non-Jewish people, most of them again Muslims who are living in East Jerusalem, which is a different population, and we are not going to discuss today about East Jerusalem. So we are talking approximately about 1.6 million people, most of them, of course, Muslims. You can see the numbers. We have also Christians and we have Jews. We have other small groups here in Israel, but this is the main three groups. Very interesting to notice that more than 30% are between the age of 0 and 14, which if you consider it or calculating it demographically, there is still place to that population will grow up in the future. Now, what you see in this slide is actually kind of a circle that I would like to show during my time that I have now. Every scholar who wish to, if you ask me, every scholar who wish to explore about the Arab minority in Israel cannot do it without taking into consideration three fundamental elements. One is nationalism, the second one is religion, and the third one is civil affairs. And as the first speaker had noticed, what Mansour Abbas did in 2021, a year ago, or more than a year ago, he actually broke the glass of ceiling by focusing on civil affairs, and I'll get to that later on. And there is no surprise that Mansour Abbas is in the second slide. And of course, you see on the left side of this slide, you can see the riots that we had a year ago when Arab Israeli took out the streets again and made and hurt Jews and property, and we'll get to that later on because it's all about politics eventually. I'll start by presenting this picture. This is the leadership of the Israeli Arabs in the 50s. Those people who were approximately 900,000 people until 1948, until the civil war actually has broken up after the 181 UN General Assembly resolution in 1947. They were around 900,000 people, and after the war, they became less than 100, around 150. And so looking into the political leadership, because we are talking here politics today, we can say that most of the traditional leadership were focused on the question, how can we minimize the damage from the Israeli or Jewish new state towards the minority, the Arab minority who left in Israel. Therefore, they choose to join the ruling party of the Labour Party. In Hebrew, it's called Mapai. I don't know how many of you have ever heard the name, but now you know that. Mapai, M-A-P-A-I, Mapai. David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, was the leader of Mapai. And it doesn't mean that they were Zionist. It just means that they tried to minimize damage by showing some civil loyalty to the government. By that time, you see those two young gentlemen. First is Tufik Tubi on the right, and the second one is the famous Palestinian Arab-Israeli author Emil Habibi. They joined the Communist Party. In Hebrew, it calls Maki, but it's or PCP, Palestinian Communist Party, which was established back in 1919. It's now more than 100 years ago. And this party was a home for Jews and Arabs as well, who look basically to establish a community, a joint community of Jews and Arabs in the new state of Israel, marching together, Jews and Arabs, up to communist or socialist values. But so if we speak until 1959, or even until 1967, we can talk about the communist stream, which was the only nationwide stream in the Israeli politics of the Arab minority, and of course, on the other end, those who joined to the Zionist party just to show some civil loyalty. It is also here important to remember that in 1952, Gamal Abdel Nasser made the revolution, the military revolution or the officer revolution in Egypt. Now, I'm not going to talk about the revolution in Egypt in what we call an internal Egyptian dimension, but it's important to understand that the pan-Arabism of Gamal Abdel Nasser was influenced dramatically on the young generation who were by that time around the age of 20, 25, 30, people who were born in 1929, 1932, something like that. And they thought to do something else. It was not enough for them to be either loyal to the Zionist party or be a communist. What makes it worse was the fact that Israel had established a military or implemented a military rule from 1948 to January 1968. I know that some of you may have read that the military rule was abolished in November 1966 by the late Prime Minister Levi Eshkol, but the fact that Israel entered the war with Egypt and Syria and Jordan in June 1967 made that decision to be implemented only in January 1968. The people that you see on the upper side of the slide are very important to this issue. On the central, it's Menachem Begin, the head of the Likud, and right next to him, this is Menachem Begin, and this is Meir Yaari. He was a person, the chair of Mapam, a left party supported with collaboration with Arabs, and Begin as a right ideologist supported liberal rights for Arabs, and they joined to abolish the military rule. All those figures that you see on the left side of the slide or on the right side, check it out from 1949 to 1956, and all of them came to the conclusion and the recommendation that the military rule should be remained. And it took a few years later that it was abolished. I'm moving very fast to the situation after 1967. The war in 1967 not only enlarged the territories that now Israel dominated, but also opened the borders between Israeli Arabs and their brothers and sisters in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. And the first consequences was that early in the 70s, we saw two very important developments. On the left side of this slide, you can see the logo of what we call the Son of the Village, or in Arabic, Abna al-Balad. And it is not surprising that you see the logo of the Palestinian Liberation Front of George Habash of the PFLP, of the PLO, because the ideology was the same. And the ideology in one sentence for this meeting was, we have to liberate all Palestine by armed struggle, and the justice must be done in Nablus and in Ramallah and in Tel Aviv and in Haifa and elsewhere, because all of it is Palestine. By that time, in 1972, on the right side of the slide, you can see the picture of Abdallah Nimer al-Darwish. Abdallah Nimer al-Darwish was a religious person for Qasem, which is a small village around 15 kilometers eastern from Tel Aviv, if somebody know how the Israeli map is looking. And he established the Islamic movement. I'll get to the Islamic movement and Nasr Abbas later on, but it's important to you to remember that this was the story at that time. And the first political event that made for the Israeli Jews establishment that something has changed in the Israeli Arab minority population was the Land of Day in 1976. This is not by happen that you see the picture from that time in 1976. You can see on the right side here the Nakba Day, to remember what happened in 1948. You can see here the flags of the PLO, which was by that time symbolized the national awakening of the Palestinian identity among Israeli Arabs. And together with the flags of the PLO, you can see the red flag of the communists, because the communists basically all the time had the tension between, are we communists or are we nationalists? And they try to go in between, try all the time to maneuver between their communist ideology and national identity of being Palestinians, understanding that they cannot be part of the Jewish majority because they are simply not Jewish. And of course, this old man with the kafaya and the keys in his hands is symbolizing the dream to go back, to come back to the houses and the property that we left or lost in 1948. At that time, in 1976, it was very important because from that time on, it's not only the fact that 6 people or 6 Arab Israelis were killed, it was a signal for the Israeli establishment that the confiscation of lands from Arab should be stopped. And the historical fact is that from 1976 to 1998, despite the fact that since 1990, Israel was flowed by millions of Jews and immigrants from the former Soviet Union, Israel did not confiscate lands from the Arabs, remembering what happened in 1976. You can see here the pictures of that day of the Israeli press. By that time, I don't know how many of you can read Hebrew, but you can certainly read in the memory of those who fell in the Lands Day here. And you can see here the Israeli Communist Forum, and those who know Arabic can know that it's written here, the Muntada and Shuyu'i al-Israeli, and so on. And I'm going to the 90s because we are lack of time. It's not by surprise that you can see here six pieces, those 6 people. Sorry for that. Oh, okay. I'll start from the left and we go with the clock like this. This is Yitzhak Shamir. He was the Prime Minister of Israel until 1992. And despite being a right-wing extremist who opposed to any political settlement with the Palestinians in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, he was realized by the 1990 that things should be implemented differently with those Arabs who are the citizens of Israel. It's not because he loved Arabs, it's because he understood that after 2 years or 3 years of intifada or uprising in the Palestinian territories starting from December 1987, something must be done differently. He was surrounded by then by very knowing political figures from the Likud party, people, I don't know if you have heard the names like Moshe Arens and Ehud Olmert, who later became the prime minister, and Ronen Milo and others who told to Prime Minister Shamir, we must do something different for the Israeli Arabs. in one sentence, to conclude it, and you can read it in my studies, of course, if until 1990, the basic major salient element of the Israeli policy towards the Arab were security dimension, from 1990 onward, it became both security and both civil. Not surprisingly, Yitzhak Rabin, and that was mentioned earlier by the former speaker, Yitzhak Rabin, after 1992, realized that he did not have a coalition without the supporting of 5 Arab members, and therefore he went to the Oslo Agreement based on 64 votes out of 120. 59 were in the coalition, and plus the 5 of the Arabs. And of course, for exchange, they demanded from him to promote civil affairs for our population, and he did it slowly but surely. I'm sure that all of you know who is this person, and Netanyahu, in his first tenure as prime minister from 1996 to 1999, extended the investment, the civil investment for Arab population in Israel. One may expect that Netanyahu, that was and still a right-wing ideologist person, would change what Shamir and Rabin started, but Netanyahu, as a liberal person, by that time in 1996, kept this activity on and changed the policy. And you can see it's not only a question of money and budget, it's only a question of dialogue and laws. And by that time, we could see how many people, how much or how many Arab people has become a part of making decisions in the Israeli political arena, of basically what on issues that concern the Israeli our minority, which is civil affairs. And this one here, down below Shamir, Shawki Khatib, he was the head of the Supreme Committee of Monitoring Supreme Committee of the Israeli Arabs at that time, and he said, we have started the golden era of the Israeli Arabs, because it's the first time in 1995 under Rabin, before he was assassinated. It is the first time that the Israeli government is speaking with us, discussing with us, consulting with us, and we can see and feel that there is a change on the ground. On the other side of this balances, those two people. This is Azmi Bishara, Dr. Azmi Bishara, a philosopher who established the party of Balad in 1995, and he objected to the Jewish character of Israel as a Jewish nation state, and he was what we all know from a long time, an all-citizen state. Despite the fact that Israel has changed its policy since 1990, Azmi Bishara, who is now 66 years old, he was born in 1956, so think about it, 25 or 27 years ago, he was around 40 years old, young, educated Arab Christian, Greek Orthodox, who was born in Nazareth. He said, well, what you gave us from 1990 to 1996 is not enough. We want more than that. We want to change the character of the Israeli state. There is no such a thing like Am Israel or the people of Israel, because basically you are Jewish and Judaism is only a no more than religion. Parallel to Azmi Bishara, which is a Christian, as I said, and is of course a secular person, Sheikh Raya Salah, born in 1958. You see the finger, you see the yarmulke on his head, and he was part of the Islamic movement by that time, and that takes me to talk about the Islamic movement. I'm not going to say so many things about the Islamic movement in Israel, because I believe that people in Indonesia and elsewhere knows that all of the Islamic movements in the world, Hamas and the one in Israel and others, are all offshoots of the Muslim Brothers of Hassan al-Banna in Egypt back in 1988. But it's important to know that this Islamic movement, and you can see here the the books and the Sharia and how women should be dressed and elsewhere. The big dream or vision is to establishing again an Islamic caliphate from the west here in Cordoba, Spain, up to the borders of the east. You see here, this is Iran, of course, and that's also part of the Islamic movement ideology here in Israel. What turns to be an internal rift was the fact that despite the Islamic movement was busy with what we call in Arabic da'wah, education, health, religion, welfare, from the 80s, around 1982, 83, up to 1996, was not enough for some of its members. And they agreed in 1988 that the movement should take place or participate in municipal elections within Israel, if it goes back to politics. Why? Because if we can take control on municipal major Arab cities in Israel, we can take more money from the Ministry of Interior, and we can develop more civil services for our population, which is, of course, clinics and schools and gardens and mosques and so on. And by that, we can take the money from the Israeli establishment and empower our politics and our power within the regional, within the Arab sector. And eventually, they competed in 1988 elections and won the municipality of Al-Fahim, which is a very important city for our discussion. And inside the 90s, which is now almost 30 years ago, the rift is enlarged because Raed Salah here objected to take part in the national elections to the Israeli parliament, which is the Knesset, and the other members, like Mansour Abbas, for example, he was then by 22 years old. He was a kid. Now he's 48. They believed that the Islamic movement should be part of the Knesset because only within the Israeli sovereign parliament things can be really changed for the benefit of the Arab population. And as you probably know, in 1996, it was a split within the Islamic movement in Israel, what we call the northern branch, because they are located northern to the south of the southern branch. The north became more separatist, the south became more integrated. And from 1996 up to 2021, we can talk about what, as mentioned earlier, Ram, an Arabic Islamic party within the Israeli Knesset, and from 2021 onward in the Israeli coalition. These pictures reflected to you what happened 22 years ago in October events, because at that time it was quite obvious that despite the change in the Israeli policy towards the Israeli Arabs, things did not really change and was not enough not for Sheikh Raed Salah and not for Azmi Bishara. And the outcome was 12 Israeli Arabs dead, 1 Jew also were killed in these riots. It lasted 2 weeks, and it ended with a big rift. It had the political ramification on the Arab sector within Israel. I'll skip not because I cannot talk about it because we are lack of time. I'll skip about what happened between 2000 and 2015, and I want to be more talk about the currency trends. We should go back to 2014, because before the elections, the general elections of 2015, it was quite obvious that if the Arab parties will run alone by themselves to the Knesset, there is a good chance that none of them will be able to cross the threshold, because the threshold of getting into the Knesset was raised from 2% to 3.25%, which means that if in the past you were needed for approximately 25 or 30 votes to get 1 seat, and you cannot get into the Knesset if you don't have 4 seats, which means that you need 120,000 votes. None of them will be able to achieve it. It also should be remembered by that time that anyone who was monitoring social medias within the Arab sector could have seen by that time that most of the young people in the Arab sector in Israel are very, very disappointed from their leadership, because they blame them for taking care for themselves and not helping the society and promote civil affairs as the Arab are expecting them to see. And each survey that was published by that time demonstrated again and again and again that there is a good chance that the Arab voters will not go to the ballots to put their vote, whether to Arab parties or Zionist one. And the result was that those 3 parties, here you can see the communists on the right, you can see the nationalists here on the middle, Balad, and you can see here the Islamic party here, the religious. So we have communist, nationalist, and religious people joining together for a joint list, went to the Knesset and registered 13 seats in the Israeli parliament, which is very impressive. Mansour Abbas, and it was earlier mentioned, Mansour Abbas did something very unusual in 2020. He stated that he will sit in any future government in Israel in order to promote civil affairs for the Israeli Arabs. It doesn't mean that he is not religion, person. It doesn't mean that he does not believe anymore in the principles of the Muslim brothers and the Islamic movement. It doesn't mean that his identity, that his national identity has become a Zionist or a Jewish one. No. But it means that as a dentist from a small village in the north, which by the name of Mecarc, if you ever heard of it, he realized that if we want to do something that helps the Arab young people, remember how many of them are young, to be part of the Israeli society because they want to live in Israel and not in the Palestinian Authority, Lebanon, Syria, and elsewhere, we should focus on civil affairs. To be honest, it must be said here that Mansour Abbas had tried to do that within the joint list already in 2015. And that led to a rift between him and the people of Balad, who asked or strived to promote more national dimension of the Arab population in Israel, which is to identify with the Palestinians in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, and Mansour Abbas said no. And the political outcome was that he decided in 2019 to run by himself, and he splitted from the joint list, and the Arab population punished them by crashing them from 13 to 10. And when they realized that they can lose more seats, they reunited again and had 15 seats in the second round of elections in 2019. Today, from personal and ideological reasons, Abbas decided to run again by himself, and as it stands now, we have 10 Arab members of Knesset from Arab parties, 6 from the joint list, and 4 from Ram. And if you follow after what's going on in Israel, between the question is Netanyahu yes or Netanyahu no within the Jewish majority population, you should know also that the fact that Mansour Abbas has decided to join the Israeli government back in 2021 by breaking the glass of ceiling and demonstrating to the Israeli Arab minority we can do it differently, and we are doing it differently for you. And we know that there are problems in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. And we know that from time to time the Temple Mount can be escalated. We know all that. But if we really want to promote our civil affairs of education and sewage, and was quiet. Last year, by the time that Mansour Abbas was discussing the possibility of joining the Israeli political government or Israeli coalition, the new coalition, the Israeli Arabs took the streets again, but what we call in English the guardian of walls. The fact that civil matter of housing in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem led to a religious escalation in Al-Aqsa by the fact that Hamas was firing mortars from Gaza to Jerusalem, and the Israeli Arabs had decided by that time to break the law in mixed cities like Lod or Haifa or Acre or elsewhere, demonstrated the fragility of this population. They are all the time have what we call a hybrid identity. They all the time they try to maneuver between national, I will call it very gently, non-Jewish national identity and the fact that they are the citizens of Israel. And if we look on the Arab minority in Israel again, after what we have seen last week in Gaza Strip by the last round of clashes between Israel and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the fact that this time Jerusalem was out of the picture, the Israeli Arabs had decided to remain at home and to be silent. That is probably or perhaps a sign for the future, if I may give any sort of forecast, that in the next elections that will be held on November the 1st, the Israeli Arabs will realize that being part of the Israeli society, not only by getting money or jobs, but also by influencing, by going to the ballots, may enhance the integration and the cooperation between Arab and Jews in Israel. So, if I conclude, Arab politicians became legitimate partners within the Israeli politics since Mansour Abbas was part of the coalition in June 2021. A continuation of civil integration is something that most of the Israeli Arabs are striving for, despite the fact that they have a big dilemma regarding their national identity. Promoting civil affairs is very important for most of the Arabs. If you read polls within the Arab sectors, taking for granted that people are answering and telling you the truth, most of them would like to see improvement of infrastructures, housing, raising of rates of working for women, which is very interesting issue by itself, defeating the crime that is already mentioned before, and so forth. And there is always a tension between the fact that they are the civilians of Israel and the fact that there is a security escalation in the Palestinian arena. And for looking on the future, RAM case study reflects probably on future political decisions of Arab parties. And if the general elections ended by a draw, and Ram against will be the party that will be that maybe decide who will run here again, any Jew politician will take them to coalition in order to survive. Thank you very much. I'm now open for any questions that you like.
Thank you, Dr. Gadi Hitman, for his lecture and his willingness to share knowledge, invaluable experience about the current political condition. Dr. Gadi, as a historian, most of his studies about Israel, Middle East, those present at the MASJID Rahmatan Lil Alamin Mosque, please. Dipersilahkan kepada audiens yang hadir di Masjid Rahmatan Lil Alamin. Dipersilahkan. Oh, baik. Okay. The next opportunity for the audience who joins in the Zoom meeting. Please. Please, Mr. Mafrindo.
Assalamualaikum Merdeka. Salam alahim to Professor Dr. Gadi Hitman. It's a great pleasure, and we truly appreciate your time, your precious time, and your very enlightened insights of the local or the Arab-Israel relationship in Israel. It has been a very positive development. I could see from the efforts from the Israel government to develop a bilateral relationship with major Muslim nations policy, namely in your writing with the Turkish government, and also there's also a positive development by a local Arabic-Israel integration policy through civil affairs. I would like to ask you, in order to empower and reinforce the peace initiative, or continuous peace initiative, through the cultivation of culture of peace and tolerance, through dialogues, as what you champion for, right? So we have to have a lot of peace dialogues, so that we can continue striving towards peace. What is your opinion? If they say that the dialogues we start from the education sector, meaning we have a education program like dialogues between Arab Israeli students and also with the Jewish Israeli students from the early education throughout the higher education so that we can cultivate a culture of peace and tolerance, and to understand each other culture, and also to promote patriotism and national identity. For example, like what the Grand Chancellor of this Al-Zaytun International School, we are exposing the Israeli and Arabs issues from the early age. So that's we want to cultivate the culture of tolerance and peace from Indonesia. So, Dr. Hitman, may I know what is your opinion?
I fully agree with you that it all starts with education. But in order that it will be starting with education, we need leaders that will promote it. Benjamin Netanyahu was the Prime Minister of Israel between 2009 and 2021, and he was standing at the Bar-Ilan University in June 2009 declaring that he really wants to solve the Palestinian problem by negotiation. And I'm asking, not only you, I'm only asking Mr. Netanyahu, if you were the Prime Minister 12 years, why didn't you promote any kind of political solution? So the answer probably is that you can say what you want as a politician, but you don't really mean it. Just in order not to be so critics on Netanyahu, let's move for a second, with your permission, to the Palestinian side. Well, Hamas took control on the Gaza Strip in 2007, and Abu Mazen and Hamas had tried 9 times to negotiate in order to solve their Palestinian internal political rift without any success. My third book is dealing with the Palestinian rift and explaining why they had not managed to solve their problems. Now, imagine to yourself the next scenario. We will try to educate the young generation that we want peace, and it will be beautiful. And then we'll go to Abu Mazen, which is now almost 87 years old, and we'll ask Abu Mazen, okay, let's renegotiate and with the points that we stopped back 12 or 15 years ago. Israel automatically will demand from Abu Mazen to any guarantees regarding the Gaza Strip. What Abu Mazen can give to the Israelis in Gaza Strip? Basically nothing. Take into your consideration the simple fact that without education, so many barriers of lack of faith has become between the parties. So it looks today like an illusion. But I fully agree with you that it should start with education, and it goes back to the leadership.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, thank you for Mr. Mafrindo from Malaysia. Dr. Gadi Hitman. Next question come from our brother from Singapore, Mr. Alfian Jizan. Please.
Hi.
Hi, Assalamualaikum, Merdeka. Shalom, Dr.
Shalom,
Gadi.
shalom.
So, it's Avian from Singapore. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you for the lecture that you just gave, which was to me personally, it's an eye-opener, because we hear a lot from media about the going-ons in Palestine and everything. But really, this lecture has opened my eyes, whereby there are usaha. I mean, there are people who has been trying to fight. I mean, for civil rights, civil affairs by Mansour Abbas. So you did mention towards the end about integration. So I see that the politics in Israel and Singapore is very, very similar, because me as a Malay Muslim, because we attained our democracy since our independence since 1965, where we broke away from Malaysia. So by then, the Malay Muslims are the minority. And going a bit further back during the Second World War, the Malays also involved during the war, where we fought for the nation. We have various stories about the war in the World War II, where we poured our heart and soul and our blood and our sweat in protecting the country. So it's really heartening to learn about the communists, nationalists, and the Islamists who formed a joint list. And because I think my own personal opinion that we need to have a voice in parliament or in the government to voice out our concerns and our welfare. So, like I said, it's very possible. It's very, very possible, and Singapore has proven that it is possible. So, what is your opinion on Singapore's way of integration? Because I firmly believe that it is possible for us to integrate various races and religions to integrate. And what are the chances that because right now Singapore, you can hardly see violence amongst the races. Yeah, we've been a very peaceful country since 1965. So is it possible that one day Israel and the Israeli Arabs, the Palestinians, to achieve such a peaceful country like Singapore? And what can be done? What more? Because in Singapore, because in Singapore,
that's a huge question, and you know in Islam we have Prophet Muhammad, and I'm not a prophet. I can only give you my modest forecast. It is very complicated by that time to evaluate when we will be able to discuss peace again. I'm not sure that since I'm also an expert for Palestinians, I'm not sure that the internal rift within the Palestinian arena is going to be solved soon. I'm also not sure that Abu Mazen is willing to resolve this problem with Hamas, because he doesn't trust Hamas anymore, and it's now for a long time. And the Palestinian political culture does not remove the leader. So if you go back to Arafat, until Arafat dead, nobody really dared to touch him or opposed him. Even Sheikh Ahmad Yassin was a close friend of Arafat, despite the differences of ideologies. And by the way, I'm not so sure that they had so much different of ideologies. Having said that, Abu Mazen is now 87 years old, and nobody really knows how many years he will be with us. And the question is, what will happen in the day after Abu Mazen, and who will be the leader then? But by explaining that on the Palestinians, I'm doing only half of the work, because now I have to go back to the Israeli arena and say that I think that something did happen within the Israeli society. The questions of left and right, as the world perceives Israel, are not relevant anymore. We are not talking today about left and right in terms of economy. And if I may, we are not talking today anymore about left and right in terms of territory. If you look on polls in Israel within the Jewish majority, you will see very consistently that most of the Jewish people are not ready to give up on territories for any political solutions with the Palestinians. Well, I'm not saying here that there are no Jews that are ready to do it, but most of the Jewish people are not ready to do it. So you may ask me now, okay, if it's not economy and not territory, what is it? So the question is whether Israel will be more religious or more liberal. Okay. And after saying that, the next elections are crucial, because if religion powers dominate in Israel, what are really the odds to do any political solutions? It's like this one will say this comes from the Bible, and the other one will say this comes from the Quran, and the third one will say it comes from the New Testimony. So it's all ours. And if everybody says it's all ours, there is no room to compromise. Yes. And eventually, despite the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu had succeeded to go to Abraham Accords with Bahrain and United Arab Emirates and elsewhere, the Palestinian problem and the Arab minority within Israel is an Israeli problem. So we will have to take care of it in the future. And all this long answer to you, I didn't mention one other topic which is very crucial for our discussion, demography. Demography is also changing here.
Yes, yes.
So
yes.
I don't know, I'm not trying to be pessimistic and I'm not trying to be optimistic. I'm trying to be realistic. And by that time, hoping it's wonderful. But in order that that hope will be true or the dream will come true, leaders should be brave. And I don't see today, neither in the Israeli political system or the Palestinian one, a brave leader who will stand up and say, like Anwar Sadat, for example, in 1977, I'm ready to go to Jerusalem, or I'm ready to go to Ramallah to negotiate with them and to achieve a political peace solution. Inshallah.
Inshallah. Hopefully. Thank you, Dr. Gadi, for your long answer. We are very happy to have you. I think that's all from me. Assalamualaikum Merdeka. Shalom.
Thank you, Mr. Alfian Jizan, and also for Dr. Gadi Hitman for the explanation. And right now, our Grand Chancellor of Al-Zaytun Indonesia would like to give speech according to the lectures of Dr. Gadi Hitman. And to Grand Chancellor of Al-Zaytun Indonesia, Syaykh Al-Zaytun, please.
Assalamualaikum. Shalom alaihim. Hadratul Akh Dr. Gadi Hitman, uhanni'uka bitahni'atin aliyah ala istita'ikum bilqa al-muhadara indana atau hawalaina huna. Syukran kasiran. Hadhihi fursah samina jiddan liannana istata'na al-hiwar baina al-Indonesiyin wa baina ulama al-Israeliyin. Hadhihi fursah samina khassatan bimawdu' as-siyasiyah yakni daur siyasiyin al-Arab fi Israel fi as-saha as-siyasiyah li Israel. Idzan aqulu laka inni matuf Wuman Naim Syafat Akhim Kam Yahad. Ana ughannika
كل الاحترام.
Ana ughannika bitahni'ah. Inni matuf Wuman Naim Syafat Akhim Kam Yahad.
I will join you. Inni matuf Manaim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Inni matuf Manaim.
Matuf Wuman Naim Gam Yachad.
Wonderful.
Ini matuf Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. كذاك سأعطيك شالوم خفاريم.
إن شاء الله قريبا في إندونيسيا وفي إسرائيل معا.
شالوم خفاريم. شالوم خفاريم. شالوم شالوم. لهيتراؤت لهيتراؤت. Shalom, shalom. Alhamdulillah, shalom. كذاك شالوم عليهم.
هذا بيسموه بالعربي إن شاء الله بيصير سلام.
الحمد لله نتكلم بالعربية لأن العربية اللغة العربية اللغة الثانية عند إسرائيليين عند حكومة الإسرائيل. طيب جدا. معلوم نعم. أخي دكتور غادي لي أسئلة واحدة فقط. كما علمنا أن في إسرائيل هناك حزب العرب. طبعا عند علمنا حزب العرب هنا حزب الإسلام. أكان هذا الحزب الأقلية في إسرائيل كان تهديدا للدولة الإسرائيلية؟
لا
حمدا كثيرا.
فيش تهديد من حزب الغام، وكمان لا حزب تهديد من القائمة المشتركة. لا فيش تهديد، بالعكس.
طيب
هذا بالعكس.
طيب
هذه فرصة للاندماج.
طيب
التعاون والمحبة والسعادة.
السؤال الثاني، كيف عند رأي العلماء الإسرائيلي عن إندونيسيا؟ خاصة أنا نفسي وكذاك جميع إخواني بمعهد الزيتون لنا إرادة لإيصال الأخوة بين إندونيسيا وإسرائيل
سياسيا ولا أكاديميا؟
كذاك سياسية وكذاك غير سياسية.
أنا في إمكانياتي والله يعني جاد بيحكي بس على موضوع الأكاديمية، وإذا في واحد من جامعة زيتون بده أي تعاون معي
أنا أقول دائما
في علاقات دينية ومدنية وسياسية وعسكرية وحضارية وكذا أنا الباب مفتوح دائما.
طيب بيننا وبينك،
بينني وبينكم طبعا 100%، وكمان ما الدائرة كلها ما المعلم عندي أنا بحكي معه بالإنجليزي وبالإبراني وأشرح له 100% بالنسبة للتعاون في المستقبل.
فكيف سعيك لإيصال هذا لأن يكون بين الإندونيسيا وإسرائيل له علاقة دبلوماسية أو إيكونومية أو المدنية وغير ذلك كل الشؤون؟ كيف سعيك؟
في كل المجالات. بس هذا كمان هذا الجواب هذا مش إلي، يعني الجواب هذا مش كاد إسرائيل وكاد إندونيسيا.
أنا كنت دائما أدعو إلى حكومة إندونيسيا لأي يتصل بالدبلوماسية، لكن حتى الآن لم يكن لنا جواب. إذن بيني وبينك، بين الجامعة الزيتون وجامعك،
من جامعة من الناحية الشخصية، وأنا بعتقد كمان من ناحية جامعة ريال، أنا لا أرى أي سبب لعدم تعاون بين الجامعتين. لما نحن بالنهاية هذا الويبينار أنا بسجل لمعلم، طبعا عندنا الإيميل والأدريس أنه يمكن ونحطه خطوة قادمة. ليش لا؟
هل تستعد؟
أنا مستعد. أنا مستعد
أن تعقد حوار خاصة لمحاورة هذه الاتصالات بين إندونيسيا وإسرائيل.
Okay?
أوكي. أعطيني دعوة خاصة. أعطيني دعوة خاصة وسأحضر إلى تل أبيب. أعطيني دعوة خاصة.
أوكي، أعطيني دعوة خاصة وأحضر جاكرتا.
طبعا بعد أن حضرنا
بس أنا لازم أقول لك إن المسافة بين تل أبيب وجاكرتا 10,000 كيلومترات قريبا. 10,000 كيلومترات.
لا، أولا أنا كنت حاضر إلى تل أبيب، بعد ذاك أنا أحملك إلى جاكرتا. طيب، شكرا كثيرا يا أخي المحبوب.
شكرا كثير.
شكرا كثيرا يا أخي محبوب. الحرية حرية حرية. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
الحرية والاستقلال. الحرية والاستقلال.
هن ماتوف ومن نائم شفت أخي كم يا أحد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. شلوم عليهم. شكرا. تודה ربah.
בבקשה.
كبخاشة.
Alhamdulillah. Once again, we would like to thank Dr. Gadi Hitman for his willingness to share knowledge, invaluable experience about the current political conditions and situation. Further, perhaps lead to the development of tolerance culture in the society of Israel, achieve lasting peace and also social justice. Amin. Hada wallahu yar'ana wa yahfaduna walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Mari kita berikan aplaus kepada Dr. Gadi Hitman atas kuliahnya yang sudah diberikan. Dikembalikan kepada Master of Ceremony. Persilahkan.
Hadirin yang berbahagia, usai sudah acara kita pada hari ini. Mari kita sempurnakan dengan berhamdalah. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin.
Bukan ditutup, langsung lanjut.
Baik. Selanjutnya, Taushiyah Syaykh Al-Zaytun. Kepada yang amat berhormat Syaykh Al-Zaytun, disilakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Saudara-saudara, alhamdulillah di pekan kedua bulan Agustus ini kita dapat menyelenggarakan Topo Proto yang diisi oleh saudara kita dari Israel, yakni Gadi Hitman, doktor, dan kita sama-sama telah mendengar apa yang diuraikan tadi. Dalam kesempatan Topo Proto kali ini, saya ingin mengajak kita semua sekali lagi mengulangi daripada ajakan-ajakan yang telah disampaikan terdahulu. Jumat kemarin saya menyampaikan bahwa Indonesia pernah mengalami kegaduhan politik, yaitu tahun 1965. ditandai dengan serangan rakyat yang dikoordinir oleh kekuatan tertentu menculik para jenderal. Kemudian terjadilah gerakan-gerakan yang sampai sekarang lukanya belum sembuh. 57 tahun kemudian terjadi lagi satu peristiwa. Sebagian orang menganggap hal biasa, kecil. Tapi menurut pemandangan kita dari sisi apapun, ini peristiwa besar. Kalau 1965 yang lalu, itu rakyat menggeruduk para jenderal, kemudian membunuhnya. Sekarang yang terjadi, jenderal yang sudah punya peran penting, menguasai kekuatan yang pelindung rakyat, kemudian menciptakan kegaduhan dengan perencanaan. Dan kegaduhan itu ditandai dengan pembunuhan, menghilangkan nyawa. Kemudian yang dihilangkan nyawanya itu bukan orang musuh, tapi orang yang sehari-hari memberikan pelayanan terhadap sang jenderal tersebut. Ini hal yang sangat memilukan bagi kehidupan berbangsa. Yang melakukan adalah penegak hukum. Kemudian rakyat dibikin gaduh karena setelah melakukan kejahatan itu membuat senario-senario yang membuat rakyat ini ikut gaduh juga dalam menanggapinya. Saudara-saudara, mungkinkah ini sebuah kejadian yang diakibatkan karena kurangnya orang-orang yang melakukan itu pemahaman terhadap nilai-nilai yang telah dijadikan nilai bersama. Hari ini orang selalu mengedepankan hukum yang kemudian dilanggarnya, yang kemudian dibuat jalan keluarnya. Hukum sesungguhnya bagi orang yang mengedepankan nuraninya ini tidak terlalu penting. Hukum itu menjadi penting kalau orang bejat nuraninya atau rusak nuraninya, maka hukumlah yang dijadikan tamengnya. Tapi orang yang mempunyai nurani yang diasah setiap saat, maka hukum itu menjadi tidak punya arti apa-apa. Entah itu kitab undang-undang hukum pidana atau hukum-hukum yang lain. Mengapa? Karena nurani orang itu adalah nilai kebenaran yang hakiki. Dalam ajaran Islam, tatkala ada sesuatu, suruh bertanya kepada dhamir, pada nurani. Tanyalah nuranimu, akan menjawab. Nah, saudara-saudara, bangsa Indonesia ini arif. Sejak mendirikan negara Indonesia, dari yang tidak ada menjadi ada, sebelum ada itu sudah ditetapkan secara bersama-sama, bukan oleh sekelompok, tapi berbagai-bagai, menetapkan sebuah dasar. Nurani itu intinya nilai ketuhanan, nilai kemanusiaan, nilai kebersatuan, nilai kemufakatan, nilai hidup dengan penuh kesejahteraan. Itu nurani. Tidak ada manusia yang nuraninya itu saya ingin tidak sejahtera, tidak ada. Semua ingin sejahtera. Saya ingin bermufakat supaya menemukan sesuatu yang baik. Itu nurani. Tidak ada yang selain itu. Aku ingin bersatu, itu nurani. Aku ingin mengedepankan nilai kemanusiaan dan keberadaban. Itu nurani. Aku ingin mendekatkan diri kepada Tuhan karena Tuhan itu yang menguasaiku. Itu nurani. Artinya, apa yang ada pada diri manusia itu di atas tangan Tuhan atau dalam genggaman Tuhan. Entah hatinya, entah matanya, entah akalnya, entah fikirnya, entah fisiknya, entah di depannya, entah di belakangnya, entah samping kanan, samping kiri, atas dan bawah, itu atas peliharaan Tuhan. Jika nuraninya itu menjadi nurani yang lurus. Saudara-saudara, ini perlu kita sampaikan dari hari ke hari. Supaya bangsa Indonesia ini tidak mengulang lagi kejadian-kejadian yang bertentangan dengan berbagai dasar yang telah diyakini bersama. Kita menyanyi Indonesia Raya. Di Indonesia Raya itu ada 3 stansa, bukan 1 stansa saja. Hari ini kita menyanyikan lagu kebangsaan Indonesia Raya, 1 stansa. Itu pun sering dinyanyikan dengan irama musik sahaja. Tidak dilantunkan dengan kata-kata yang diresapi oleh nuraninya, oleh akal fikirnya, oleh hatinya, oleh mulut yang menyatakan nyanyian itu. Itu yang dilakukan hari ini, kebanyakan seperti itu. Banyak bangsa ini yang tidak hafal untuk melantunkan lagu. Lagu kebangsaan itu dianggapnya tidak penting kalau dibandingkan dengan kalau mengucapkan suratul Fatihah. Seakan-akan suratul Fatihah itu segala-galanya. Memang itu segala-galanya. Tapi dalam kebangsaan ini ada yang segala-galanya. Resapi lagu kebangsaan Indonesia Raya. Katakan yang Indonesia Raya stansa 1 sudah semua menyanyikan, walaupun banyak yang belum hafal. Coba nyanyikan yang kedua, apa itu pesannya dalam nyanyian kedua itu? Indonesia tanah yang mulia. Kalau tanah yang mulia itu yang berdiri di atasnya harus menjadi insan yang mulia. Karena tempatnya mulia. Indonesia tanah yang kaya. Akan menjadi miskin kalau memang kekayaannya itu tidak dimanage dengan ilmu pengetahuan. Tidak dimanage dengan ketulusan. Tidak dimanage dengan kelurusan manajemen. Tanah yang kaya seperti ini masih banyak orang yang kurang makan. Tanah yang kaya seperti ini masih banyak yang kurang protein. Bisa memenuhi karbohidrat saja sudah lumayan. Apalagi protein, masih banyak. Indonesia tanah yang mulia, tanah kita yang kaya. Di sanalah aku berdiri untuk selama-lamanya. Ini tidak pernah dilakukan, tidak pernah dinyanyikan. Kalau kita menyanyi itu adalah sebuah statement. Kalau kita sudah punya statement, ini mengharapkan kepada nurani kita akan berpegang kepada statement itu. Duduk di tanah yang mulia, tanah yang kaya, terkadang ingin kaya melalui jalan-jalan yang tidak mulia. Saudara-saudara, coba apa pesannya lagi? Kita diajak mendoa. Lagu Indonesia Raya ini doa. Marilah kita mendoa agar Indonesia bahagia. Gimana membahagiakan bangsa Indonesia? Rujuk kepada dasar negaranya. Mewujudkan satu keadilan sosial bagi seluruh rakyat Indonesia. Marilah kita mendoa Indonesia bahagia. Suburlah tanahnya. Sering kita mengatakan Indonesia kesulitan pangan karena musim hujan kurang. Ini pesannya, suburlah tanahnya. Doa itu diucapkan untuk yang ilahi, dilaksanakan untuk yang insani. Kemanusiaan yang adil itu ya berdoa pada Tuhan yang Maha Esa, melaksanakan. Itu peradaban. Jadi Indonesia, suburlah tanahnya, suburlah jiwanya. Jiwa yang subur itu jiwa yang selalu ingat kepada Tuhannya, selalu ingat pada dasar yang telah disepakati, baru subur jiwanya. Suburlah bangsanya. Bangsa yang subur tentunya bangsa yang bisa dihitung kebahagiaannya dari sisi kehidupan duniawi. Karena kehidupan ukhrawi itu ditentukan oleh kehidupan duniawi. Di dunia ini yang menentukan surgakah yang kita buat atau neraka. Wa qina adzabannar. Fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina adzabannar. Jauhkan kami daripada api neraka. Neraka di dunia, baik itu neraka kehidupan ekonomi, neraka kebodohan, neraka tidak mampu menguasai diri, dan lain-lain. Itu diurai. Suburlah rakyatnya. Rakyat subur. Semuanya. Nah, untuk menciptakan itu, doa yang lain, sadarlah hatinya. Orang yang bisa sadar hatinya, dan sadarlah budinya, itu kalau selalu mengingat apa yang dicita-citakan. Cita-cita di Indonesia, cita-cita Indonesia ini berpijak pada Tuhan, berpijak pada kemanusiaan yang adil dan beradab, berpijak pada persatuan, berpijak pada rakyat yang mufakat dalam menentukan segala macamnya, berpijak pada keadilan sosial. Ini pijakannya. Semuanya itu diperuntukkan untuk Indonesia, jangan untuk yang lain-lainnya. Kalau kita berhubungan diplomatik dengan negara lain, itu urusan persahabatan. Tapi jangan dijadikan hal itu untuk tujuan. Segala macam tadi diperuntukkan untuk katakan Cina. Yang baru tadi kita cakap dengan kawan kita, Gadi, Hitman tadi, Israel. Bukan, itu mestinya untuk menjalin persahabatan. Doa tanah yang mulia, tanah yang kaya. Saudara-saudara, kemudian stanza ketiga kita mengatakan Indonesia tanah yang suci. Tanah suci ini jangan dinodai. Saudara-saudara, kita umat Islam tatkala datang ke tanah suci Makkah Al-Mukarramah atau tatkala datang ke Makkah Al-Mukarramah, kita mengatakan pergi ke tanah suci, sehingga sesuatu yang tidak baik itu dihindari. Mengapa kita yang sudah mengatakan Indonesia tanah yang suci, masih banyak sesuatu yang tidak baik itu dilakukan di tanah suci ini? Contoh yang paling belakang ini, yang rame ini, yaitu menumpahkan darah, mencabut nyawa di tanah yang suci. Saudara-saudara, jangan diterjemahkan tanah tumpah darahku terus menumpahkan darah. Terjemahkan tanah tumpah darah itu adalah tumpah darah ibunda kita untuk melahirkan kita. Apapun cara melahirkan itu tetap menumpahkan darah. Entah itu melahirkan secara normal atau melahirkan secara operasi sesar, semua menumpahkan darah. Maka disebut tanah tumpah darahku. Darah ibu ditumpahkan untuk melahirkan anak bangsa ini. Kemudian dilanjutkan, tanah yang sakti. Tanah sakti ini merupakan sesuatu yang tidak boleh diremehkan, tidak boleh dianggap cincai, tidak boleh dianggap gampang diatur. Tanah suci ini malati. Malati itu artinya membuat kualat. Siapa yang langkahnya tidak tepat, kualat. Siapa saja bisa kualat. Ini tanah yang sakti. Di mana tanah sakti itu? Disitulah kita berdiri. Kita harus selalu hati-hati. Hati-hati, waspada. Kata Ronggo Warsito, sak bejo bejane wong kang edan isi bejo wong kang eling tur waspada. Artinya terus ingat pada dasar negaranya, ketuhanan yang Maha Esa memberikan hidup dan itu hak asasi orang per orang. Jangan sampai ditumbangkan. Nah, saudara-saudara, di tempat yang suci ini kita berdiri. Untuk apa? Untuk kita selalu mengatakan, marilah kita berjanji Indonesia abadi. Kejadian-kejadian yang kemarin ini miris. Kawan-kawan kita yang dari Sumatera Utara sana mengadakan semacam show atas nama suku. Kita tidak bisa menafikan hal itu. Tapi masih mengendalikan diri. Nah, tapi kalau ini diteruskan yang lain-lain juga seperti itu, ini akan membahayakan. Tapi mari kita yakini bahwa siapa yang dekat, siapa yang menjalankan, menyadari dengan sesadar-sadarnya nilai-nilai yang sudah disepakati bersama ini dilaksanakan dalam kehidupan keseharian, Indonesia pasti abadi. Malah di sini juga dinyatakan bahwa ada doa lagi. Selamatlah rakyatnya. Maka Indonesia punya pelindung rakyat. Polisi. Tapi polisi dinudai. Tidak boleh dikatakan oleh segelintir orang. Dinudai oleh orang. Polisi yang menjadi polisinya polisi. Polisinya polisi menodai rakyat. Jangan dianggap satu nyawa itu tidak ada artinya. Siapa yang membunuh satu orang sama dengan membunuh seluruh manusia. Selamatlah rakyatnya. Polisi harus menyelamatkan rakyat, bukan membunuh apapun alasannya. Karena kita mempunyai kemanusiaan yang adil dan beradab. Rakyat membunuh rakyat saja harus dihakimi, dibawa ke pengadilan. Lah ini yang menjaga keselamatan rakyat, membunuh rakyat. Apakah kalau polisi yang berpangkat rendah itu bukan rakyat? Rakyat. Selamatlah putranya. Dilindungi putra Indonesia ini, putra bangsa Indonesia ini dilindungi dimanapun. Selamatlah rakyatnya. Yang menjaga keselamatan rakyat satu diantaranya adalah polisi. Kemudian juga kita berdoa, selamat pula pulaunya. Jangan ada yang dijual ke asing. Jangan ada yang dikuasai oleh orang asing. Selamatlah pulaunya. Lautnya. Jangan sampai dikuasai orang asing. Semuanya supaya selamat. Dan berdoa, majulah negerinya. Kalau kita berdoa untuk kemajuan, majulah negerinya, artinya majulah rakyatnya. Ini kemajuan rakyat itu ditentukan oleh pendidikan rakyat itu. Pendidikan rakyat itu ditentukan oleh kebijakan sang pemimpin rakyat. Saudara-saudara, ini sangat penting. Dilupakan. Tidak ada yang melakukan menyanyikan lagu kebangsaan Indonesia secara rutin 3 stanza. Kalaulah ada musik. Majulah pandunya. Pandu itu ada tentara. Kita punya tentara nasional Indonesia. Pelan-pelan tentram tentara kita. Polisi juga pandu. Tatkala pandu ini berpisah, yang Tejen 1 wadah antara tentara nasional Indonesia dan Polri bersatu dalam satu naungan kepemimpinan, itu tidak pernah mendengar ada polisi membunuh bawahannya. Nah, tatkala lepas, tentara nasional punya panglima yang mempanglimai 3 angkatan. Sekarang ada 1 polisi yang hakikatnya angkatan bersenjata itu. Berdiri sendiri. Nah, kejadianlah seperti hari ini. Saudara-saudara, Indonesia Raya 3 stanza ini mestinya dikumandangkan, diinternalisasikan, dihabitualisasikan dalam kehidupan nyata. Sehingga dasar negara itu masuk dan diresapi. Kita mengikuti perkembangan kejadian belakangan ini, belum ada yang kita dengar bagaimana mengambil solusi supaya tidak terjadi lagi itu. Maka dalam kesempatan ini alangkah baiknya setelah kita mengadakan reformasi yang bertujuan merombak semuanya, Undang-Undang Dasar 45 dirombak sehingga demokrasinya demokrasi liberal. Kemudian dipisahkan polisi daripada induknya dan punya komandan tertinggi sendiri dan bergaya militer. Sedangkan polisi adalah sipil yang bersenjata. Alangkah baiknya, mumpung belum terlanjur terlalu lama, kembali demokrasi Indonesia seperti yang pernah dijalankan dan terus kita jaga, diperbaiki. Terus ada angkatan bersenjata, termasuk polisi itu angkatan bersenjata. Mari kita berharap supaya angkatan bersenjata ini panglimanya satu, supaya bisa dikontrol. Tidak ada dua matahari angkatan bersenjata. Ini ada matahari kembar di Indonesia ini. Angkatan bersenjatanya ada mataharinya masing-masing. Yang satu punya matahari sendiri, yang tiga punya mataharinya. Nah, kita berharap matahari angkatan bersenjata Republik Indonesia ini satu mataharinya, sehingga bisa pagi-pagi terbit untuk bersinar, kemudian tanaman-tanaman bisa menciptakan fotosintesis, kemudian bisa menciptakan hasil yang bagus, sorenya tenggelam, dalam arti untuk beristirahat, dan apa yang ada di dunia ini bisa mempersiapkan kehidupan selanjutnya. Nah, saudara-saudara, ini pesan hari ini bukan menanggapi. Saya belum ada kejadian-kejadian ini, selalu mengingatkan bagaimana memegang teguh dasar negara yang telah disepakati bersama. Hadza wallahu yar'ana wa yaghfaduna walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Merdeka.
Hadirin, usai sudah acara kita pada hari ini, mari kita sempurnakan dengan berhamdalah. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Merdeka.